Have you ever witnessed someone being asked to give up a seat they paid for just because of who they are? Imagine a calm, poised black woman in her 60s, boarding a flight, settling into business class, only to be told she doesn't belong. This wasn't just any passenger, this was Dr. Nadia Cole, a trailblazing biotech CEO, a leader who's shaped industries and mentored generations. Yet on Flight 316 from Atlanta to Portland, she faced a challenge that no amount of success could shield her from discrimination disguised as policy. What happens when quiet dignity meets systemic bias? When a woman refuses to move, not with anger, but with unshakable calm and clear intention? How far can one person's stillness shake the foundations of an entire airline? And more importantly, what does it say about the world we live in when respect is still something you have to fight for? This is not just a story about one flight or one seat. It's about power, justice, and the cost of silence. It's about the strength it takes to hold your ground and demand the world change its rules, not for you, but for everyone. If you believe in the power of quiet courage and real change, hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Let's dive in. The boarding gate at Atlanta Hartsfield was humming the way it always did on Friday afternoons. People moved in streams. Some rushed. Others hovered near outlets or scrolled endlessly through phones. Nobody noticed the woman in the navy sweater, and that was how she preferred it. Dr. Nadia Cole walked with measured steps, nothing flashy, nothing rushed. Her black tote bag was worn but well kept, its leather softened from years of real use. She didn't pull a roller bag behind her, just that single tote, tucked under one arm, like a trusted companion. She handed her boarding pass to the agent without a word. The scanner beeped. "Enjoy your flight," the attendant said, barely glancing up. Nadia nodded once and entered the jet bridge. The warm scent of filtered air and carpet shampoo greeted her. That scent every frequent flyer knew. She found her seat easily. Row 4, Seat D, business class, right side of the aisle. She didn't make eye contact with the other passengers already seated. She didn't need to. She simply slid into her seat with the quiet grace of someone who knew how to take up space without announcing it. She tucked her tote beneath the seat in front of her, placed her hands in her lap, and sat back. Nadia Cole wasn't the type to fidget. She didn't scroll on her phone. She didn't flip through the safety card or adjust the air nozzle. She simply breathed and waited. 2 rows ahead, a man in a gray blazer reclined slightly, sipping from a bottle of water. He glanced back once, briefly, as if noting who was behind him. Then he turned forward again. The cabin was still boarding. Overhead, bins opened and shut. A baby cried in coach. A couple argued in hushed tones by row 9, but row 4 was silent, except for the subtle buzz of pressurized air and a soft, intermittent ding as other passengers checked in. Nadia sat still, the way a tree might sit still in the middle of a storm and had already survived. From the corner of her eye, she saw a woman walking toward her, late 20s, maybe early 30s, blonde, polished. The kind of polish that was taught, trained. Her uniform was crisp. Her smile was measured, practiced. The woman stopped at row 4, leaned slightly in, and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this section is for business class only." The words weren't cruel, not exactly. But they carried a tone, the kind of tone that assumed something small, something sharp. Nadia looked up slowly, not startled, not angry, Just aware. I'm aware, she replied, her voice even. She reached calmly into the seat pocket and handed over her boarding pass. The flight attendant took it, glanced at it, then again, as if expecting it to change. It didn't. Seat 4D, Nadia said, softly, booked and confirmed, Atlanta to Portland. The attendant's mouth smiled again, but her eyes did not. She held the pass for a second longer, then handed it back. Would you mind stepping aside while we sort this out? Nadia didn't flinch. She didn't stand. No, she said. I'm fine right here. Her voice didn't rise. There was no sarcasm, no edge, just facts, just stillness. The attendant hesitated, blinked, then turned and walked away. The air changed. Not dramatically, but you could feel it. A subtle shift, a tension. 3 rows back, a young man lowered his phone slowly and tapped a button. Record. Nadia noticed it. Of course she did, but she didn't look at him. She simply sat, spine straight, hands folded again. A minute passed, then another, and then a man appeared, mid-40s, white, tailored navy blazer, designer shoes, hair styled like someone paid to have it styled. He stood beside the row, gesturing toward Nadia's seat. I believe this one's mine, he said, directing the comment toward the flight attendant who had now returned. I specifically requested 4D. He added, it was confirmed when I booked. The flight attendant turned to him gratefully, like he had handed her an escape rope. She took his boarding pass, looked it over, then looked back at Nadia. Her voice was more firm now. Ma'am, would you please let us move you to a seat in economy, just for this flight? The words weren't cruel, but the subtext was loud. You don't belong here. Nadia exhaled slowly. She didn't look up at first, just stared for a moment at the fabric on the seat in front of her. Then she turned. No, she said again, just that. One word. The man in the blazer chuckled under his breath. Come on, he muttered. Be reasonable. Nadia looked at him then, her eyes steady, not angry, not shaken. I am, she said. That's all. He blinked, sat back down in his own seat, across the aisle. Nobody said anything, but everyone was listening, one by one. Passengers turned pages slower, tapped their phones quieter, stared ahead without really seeing. The silence was thick, not awkward, not loud, just present. Then Nadia reached down into her tote. Not quickly, not to grab a phone. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, opened it, and began to write. The pen moved smoothly. She didn't glance around, didn't explain. She wrote the way some people breathe, like it was necessary, like it had always been part of the plan. A line formed at the front of the plane. A supervisor had been called. A whisper passed between 2 crew members. Then one of them disappeared toward the cockpit. But Nadia. She just kept writing, like she had done this before, because she had, and even if no one else in that cabin knew it yet, the flight wasn't even in the air, and the story had already begun. The silence hung longer than it should have. Rachel, the flight attendant, had retreated to the galley. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something tighter, something more cautious. She was whispering to another crew member, glancing back occasionally toward row 4. The whispers were short, clipped. A decision was being made. Nadia Cole didn't move. The notebook was still open on her lap. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. She paused after each line, not for effect, but for clarity, like each sentence mattered. She wasn't writing for an audience. She never did. She wrote because it kept the truth honest. Row 4 was still. The man in the blazer, Thomas Hallbridge, had started scrolling on his phone, pretending not to look. But every now and then, his eyes darted up, watching her, waiting. 3 seats across, a woman in business attire tugged her scarf slightly tighter around her neck. She wasn't cold. She was uncomfortable. Not with Nadia, but with the feeling that maybe she'd seen this scene play out before, just with different people, different uniforms. Rachel reappeared. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in his early 50s, broader shoulders, graying temples, silver name tag. He introduced himself quickly. "Ma'am, I'm Todd, lead attendant on Flight 316. I understand there's some confusion about seating." Nadia looked up, her pen still resting in the crease of the notebook. "There's no confusion," she replied. "My boarding pass is correct. I'm seated in 4D. Todd nodded once, glanced down at the boarding pass she offered again. He studied it longer than Rachel had. Then, without looking at her, he asked, "Would you be open to relocating? Just to help us resolve this situation." Nadia didn't raise an eyebrow. She didn't narrow her eyes. She simply breathed in and said, with perfect calm, "No, I would not." Todd nodded again, not in agreement, just acknowledgement, a silent note made somewhere behind his expression. The tension was louder now. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats. You could hear it in the silence that followed. Even the overhead bins seemed to have stopped clicking shut. "Understood," Todd said. "I'll inform the captain." He turned and left. Rachel stayed for just a second longer, hovering, unsure. "Would you like a beverage while we sort this out?" she asked, voice softer now. Nadia didn't respond immediately. She looked at Rachel for the first time, really looked at her, and in that moment, there was no hostility, just a quiet kind of sadness. "No, thank you," Nadia said gently. "I'm fine." Rachel nodded and walked away, 3 rows back. The man with the phone was still recording. Subtle, angle low, but his camera was aimed at Nadia's aisle. Even if this wasn't viral yet, it was already history. Nadia sat back, closed the notebook. She wasn't done writing, but now she was thinking, because it wasn't just about her. It never was. She thought of all the flights she'd taken, all the lounges she'd waited in, all the security checks where she was randomly selected, all the meetings where she was the keynote speaker but someone still assumed she was the assistant. Dr. Nadia Cole had built a company from nothing, pioneered biotech therapies that saved lives, advised governments, donated millions to women's colleges, mentored over 100 young scientists of color, sat on advisory boards, spoke at summits, and yet, here she was, asked to move, again. She closed her eyes, not to rest, to focus. The plane was still boarding. The captain had not yet announced departure. But the air had changed. That strange, quiet tension had spilled from business class into coach. People were watching, some out of curiosity, some out of guilt, some because they recognized her now. But recognition was never the point. Respect was. 10 rows back, a woman leaned over to her daughter. "She's being so calm," she whispered. Her daughter nodded, because she has nothing to prove, and she didn't. But Nadia still felt something rising in her. Not anger, not fear, resolve, a kind of weight she'd learned to carry gracefully, but never lightly. This wasn't about a seat. It was about the system that kept asking her to shrink for its comfort. She would not across the aisle. Thomas was now visibly annoyed. He turned to Rachel when she passed again. "You said this was my seat?" he hissed under his breath. Rachel shook her head softly. "We're confirming with dispatch." Thomas scoffed. Unbelievable. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Nadia opened her eyes again. Her notebook remained closed now. Her hands rested on the cover. She wasn't writing anymore, because the next part of this story wouldn't come from her pen. It would come from someone else's phone, or someone else's fear, or a call from somewhere higher than this cabin. And it was coming, because Nadia had already made one small move the others hadn't noticed. She had opened her phone, tapped her calendar, marked the time, and waited, not to fight, not to plead, but to be ready. 15 minutes. She had said it before, and she meant it. The captain still hadn't spoken. The doors were still open, but the energy in the cabin had shifted completely. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no arguing, but the silence carried weight, the kind you feel before a thunderstorm breaks, when the sky tightens and time stretches out. Doctor. Nadia Cole hadn't moved. She remained seated in 4D, her notebook now closed, resting beneath her folded hands. She looked forward, not at anyone. Her expression was serene, not passive, not distant, just deeply rooted, the kind of calm that made noise feel unnecessary. Across the aisle, Thomas Hallbridge shifted in his seat again. He pulled his jacket tighter around his frame, even though the cabin wasn't cold. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped his armrest. He kept glancing at Nadia like she owed him something, like her stillness was an affront. Rachel passed by again, slower this time. She didn't say anything, just looked at Nadia and then quickly looked away. She was checking the rest of the rows now, her smile gone. It had become clear even to her that this wasn't a simple seating issue anymore. This had become a situation. Further back, a man with a buzz cut and thick glasses muttered under his breath. Something about always making a scene. His wife nudged him and whispered, "Don't start." He said nothing else, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air, even if they hadn't been directed at anyone. Nadia heard them. Of course she did. She didn't flinch, but inside, a quiet battle stirred. A part of her, small but familiar, asked the old question, is it worth it? Would it be easier to just get up, move to economy, let them win? Just this once, would it change anything? She knew the answer. She had known it for decades. But that didn't mean the question didn't still knock, because it always knocked, even after all the years, even after the accomplishments, the accolades, the articles, the awards, even after becoming the founder and CEO of a biotech company that revolutionized rare disease treatment, after testifying before Congress, after funding hundreds of scholarships for Black women in STEM. The question still came, is it worth it? And, once again, Nadia said the same thing inside that she always had. Yes, it is. Because this wasn't about ego. This was about pattern, and patterns do not break themselves. The intercom dinged. Cabin crew, prepare for final boarding. Rachel returned, flanked this time by a taller flight crew member Nadia hadn't seen before, a man in his late 40s, with a headset clipped to his collar and a small tablet in his hand. His demeanor was less polished than Todd's, more practical. He looked like someone who solved problems all day and tried not to make eye contact while doing it. "Dr. Cole," he said, looking down at his screen. "We'd like to ask once more if you'd consider moving for this flight. We have an available seat in economy with extra leg room, and we'll make sure you're compensated accordingly." The phrase landed wrong. Compensated accordingly. Like she had agreed to be part of a mistake. Like her dignity had a price. Nadia looked at him evenly. "No," she said again. The man sighed, typed something on the screen, then looked at Rachel. "She's staying." Rachel nodded slowly. She wasn't hiding her discomfort anymore. "Thank you," Nadia said, her voice calm. The man blinked. "For what? For not asking a fourth time?" He gave a half smile, more shame than humor, and walked off. As they disappeared behind the curtain, Nadia finally exhaled fully. It wasn't relief, not yet, just a breath, one that had been waiting at the edge of her ribs for the last 10 minutes. She reached down and opened her notebook again. This time she didn't write a paragraph, just a sentence, 3 times in 20 minutes. "Asked to justify my presence." She underlined it once, from behind. A voice startled her. "You handled that better than I would have." Nadia turned slightly. A woman across the aisle, older, her face lined with age and years of watching the world turn unfair. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you raised hell," the woman said. "But you didn't." Nadia gave a small smile. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. The woman nodded. Sometimes silence protects your health. That earned a real smile from Nadia. Back toward the rear of the plane, a teenager with pink box braids had been watching everything. She wasn't trying to hide it. She was too young to know how to pretend. Her eyes hadn't left Nadia since the first "ma'am, this is business class." She was still watching. Nadia saw her now, gave a small nod, not performative, not powerful, just human. And that nod traveled from row 4 to row 19, from one woman to another, from one future to one present. The final passengers boarded, the intercom chirped, the plane door closed, the safety demo began. The man in the blazer said nothing now. He stared ahead, eyes unfocused. He hadn't won, but he hadn't learned either. Not yet. The wheels turned, the runway approached, and somewhere up front, the captain was notified of the delay and the resolution. A note had been logged in the system. Passenger in seat 4D remained seated following dispute. Status resolved without incident. But that wasn't true. It was not without incident. The incident had simply happened without noise, and that's what made it more dangerous. Because silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it just means someone else was expected to hold the burden alone. And this time, she didn't move. The plane rumbled as it pushed back from the gate. Nadia Cole felt the subtle vibration under her shoes, the deep mechanical sound that always settled her nerves before takeoff. She gazed through the small oval window as the tarmac lights blurred by. The world outside was gold and gray, the late-day light giving everything a strange, suspended feeling. In her lap, Nadia's notebook lay open. She kept her hand atop the page, fingers lightly pressing the words she had just written. All around her, people were buckling seat belts, adjusting headphones, unwrapping breath mints from foil. She watched it all in the reflection, a mosaic of routines. But she noticed something else too. The glances, the sidelong looks from the passengers in rows around her. The way the cabin had taken on a quiet, anxious energy that refused to dissipate. Rachel came through with a tray of bottled waters. Her motions were automatic, but her eyes flicked to Nadia with a sort of silent question. There was no smile now, no pretense at comfort. Nadia took a bottle, nodded, and said nothing. The seatbelt sign dinged on, the engines roared louder, the plane lifted, nose up, weightless for a brief moment. Atlanta fell away beneath them. For a while, nothing happened. Nadia watched the clouds roll past, then closed her eyes, allowing her breathing to settle into a slow, steady rhythm. She counted her breaths the way her grandmother had taught her as a girl. 4 in, 4 out. Let the body remember what calm feels like, even when the mind doesn't. She felt a tap on her arm. "Excuse me, Dr. Cole." Todd's voice was softer now, nearly apologetic. He leaned in, lowering his voice so that only Nadia could hear him. "Would you mind joining me at the galley for a moment? There's something we need to clarify about the seating." Nadia opened her eyes, glanced at the rows ahead, and then met his gaze. There was fatigue in his eyes, not malice. She nodded, unbuckled her belt, and rose slowly. As she stood, Nadia felt the eyes again, watching, measuring her patience, wondering if she would snap or keep her composure. She carried her notebook with her, pressing it to her chest as she walked toward the galley at the front of business class. The curtain rustled closed behind them. In the narrow space, Todd's expression changed. He seemed less sure of himself now, as if the authority of the uniform had slipped away, replaced by an awkward honesty. "Look," he began, voice low, "I understand this must be frustrating. It's not about your ticket, really. There's been a request from another passenger, and there's some confusion at dispatch. Protocol says we're supposed to minimize conflict, and..." He trailed off. Rachel stood behind him, not meeting Nadia's eyes. Nadia inhaled deeply, then let her shoulders drop. Her voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than either crew member expected. "I understand your protocol," Nadia said, "but I'm not the one causing conflict. I'm not moving." Todd nodded, fiddled with the hem of his sleeve. "I know. Sometimes things get escalated when they don't need to." Nadia regarded him for a moment. "Sometimes things get escalated because the system isn't built for someone like me to remain calm." He blinked, uncertain how to respond. She opened her notebook, showed him the page where she'd documented everything so far: time, names, words exchanged. Rachel glanced at it, her lips parting in surprise. "Is there anything else?" Nadia asked quietly. Todd shook his head. "No. Dr. Cole, we'll let you get back to your seat." Nadia turned, her steps measured, and walked back to 4D. As she passed, she caught Thomas Halbridge's gaze. He looked away quickly, discomfort flickering across his features. She sat down, returned her notebook to her lap, and wrote a new line. They asked for cooperation, not justice. She stared at the words, feeling the pressure behind her eyes. A wave of exhaustion swept over her, not just from this flight, but from the memory of 1,000 small injustices, each one asking for her cooperation. It was never a demand. It was always a request, dressed up in the language of politeness. Always, just for now, just to make things easier, just to avoid a scene. Nadia had been cooperating her entire life. She glanced at the flight map on her screen, 2 hours and 30 minutes to Portland. She closed her eyes again, allowed her mind to drift. This time, the memories were sharper. She remembered her first time flying first class decades ago, after her startup received its first round of funding. She had worn her best suit, practiced her smile in the mirror, rehearsed what she would say if asked why she was there. That trip, No one said anything, but the looks had followed her from check-in to baggage claim. Now, so many years later, the questions had found words. She pressed her palm over her notebook and whispered to herself, "Stay seated." The intercom crackled. The captain announced they would be cruising at 35,000 feet, expecting mild turbulence. His voice was steady, routine, but Nadia could hear the edge of urgency in it, the kind that came from a problem he couldn't name. In the galley, Rachel and Todd stood close, heads together. "What should we do if she doesn't move?" Rachel whispered. "We wait," Todd replied, glancing down the aisle. "We don't want this getting bigger." Rachel frowned. "It already is." Back in her seat, Nadia readjusted her blanket. She heard the conversation, knew every word even if she couldn't make them out. She knew the choreography of conflict, how systems learned to whisper about you. Not to you. How they hoped you would remove yourself so they wouldn't have to do it for you. She steadied her hands. She would not give them that relief. She would not cooperate with a story written by someone else's comfort. She would not move. Instead, she took her phone from her bag, opened her calendar, and set a quiet reminder for herself. 15 minutes. She typed one line into her drafts folder. "If justice is delayed, dignity cannot be." She put the phone away. The plane flew on, silent, but for the low hum of its engines and the ever-present expectation pressing against the edges of her resolve. Nadia closed her eyes and waited. The hum of the plane settled into a rhythm, blending with the muted conversation of strangers, the rustle of snack wrappers, the ping of seatbelt signs. Dr. Nadia Cole sat in 4D, eyes closed, listening to the quiet thrum of the engines and her own heartbeat. Each time she inhaled, she felt the weight of the last hour settle deeper in her chest. She tried to release it with every exhale, but it remained a stubborn, invisible passenger. 15 minutes, she reminded herself. That was all she had said to them. 15 minutes and your CEO will be calling me. It was not a threat. It was a certainty born from years of learning that silence could carry more force than any shout. She'd learned this early, the way some children learn to whistle or ride a bike. Power, real power, was almost never loud. The flight attendants kept glancing her way. Rachel, especially, was restless. She walked the aisle more often than needed, checking on everyone else but always finding a reason to linger by row 4. Sometimes she straightened a napkin on a tray table. Sometimes she asked if anyone needed water. Her hands trembled just enough for Nadia to notice. At one point, Rachel even started to ask, "Is there anything I can do?" but her voice trailed off as she realized how pointless the offer sounded. Nadia shook her head, offering a gentle smile. "I'm fine." "Thank you." The words were true, and not. She was fine in the sense that she was whole, composed, unbroken, but she was not fine in the sense that this moment, this ordinary, unnecessary humiliation hadn't gotten under her skin. She could feel it curling in her chest, threading itself around her dignity. The urge to flee, to remove herself from the situation, gnawed at her. But she had learned over decades that standing her ground was its own act of care, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. A bell chimed near the galley. The lead attendant, Todd, took a call on the cabin phone. His back stiffened, shoulders squared. Rachel hovered beside him, whispering. Nadia watched them from her seat, calm but alert, sensing a shift in the air. Todd returned, his expression now a carefully arranged blank slate. Rachel's face, by contrast, had gone pale. "Dr. Cole," Todd said, his voice pitched a little lower. "The captain would like you to step to the front of the cabin for a moment. There's someone on the line who wishes to speak with you." For the first time, the cabin seemed to freeze. Passengers in nearby rows paused their conversations. Even Thomas Hallbridge, who had been reading a financial newspaper for the last 20 minutes, looked up, curiosity mingling with something like suspicion. Nadia nodded, closed her notebook, and placed it carefully in her tote. She rose, smoothed her sweater, and walked the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though she were wading through water. She kept her head high, her movements unhurried. In the galley. Todd gestured toward the mounted phone, the kind only used for in-flight emergencies or high-priority calls. Rachel watched, her hands clasped in front of her as if in silent apology. Nadia took the receiver, the cord coiling in her palm. She pressed it to her ear. "This is Dr. Nadia Cole," she said, her voice even unwavering. A pause, then a man's voice on the other end. "Dr. Cole, this is Eric Sandler, CEO of Vantage Sky. I want to first say how deeply sorry I am for what has transpired on your flight today." Nadia listened. She did not speak right away. She let the silence hold. Eric's words stumbled forward, each sentence heavy with the strain of too many public apologies. "We were made aware of the situation by our operations team. I assure you, I take this very seriously. I would like to resolve this with dignity and respect for you as our valued guest." Nadia let him finish. She had heard many variations of this speech before from boardrooms, from politicians, from other CEOs. What mattered was not the apology, but the actions that followed. She spoke, quiet but resolute. "Eric, I appreciate your call, but this is not about making me comfortable. This is about accountability. I will return to my seat. When we land, we will speak again. I expect a full review and new protocols before my next flight with your airline." Eric hesitated. "Of course. Anything you require, Dr. Cole." Nadia's voice softened, just slightly. "What I require is not comfort. It's change." She placed the receiver back in its cradle. The galley was so silent that Nadia could hear the engines again, a low thunder beneath the floor. Todd cleared his throat, eyes averted. "Dr. Cole, please return to your seat in business class. We'll make sure you're not disturbed for the remainder of the flight." Rachel stepped aside, her eyes shining with a complicated mix of relief and embarrassment. Nadia offered her a small, kind nod. She understood the feeling. She had been on both sides of this before, carrying the burden of someone else's shame, someone else's mistake. She walked back down the aisle. This time, the air felt different. Passengers who had been watching now looked away, some out of respect, some out of guilt. Thomas Hallbridge sat straighter, but did not meet her gaze. Nadia slid into her seat, exhaled, and reopened her notebook. In careful, steady script, she wrote, "Power does not require volume. It requires memory." She underlined it, once, then twice, from the window. The sun had begun to set, casting the inside of the cabin in warm, golden light. Nadia rested her head back and let herself feel the smallest sense of relief. Not for winning, not for being proven right, but for holding her ground with grace. She had not raised her voice. She had not let them erase her. In the rows behind her, a woman texted a friend, "She just got a call from the CEO. I've never seen anything like it." In row 19, the girl with the pink braids stared forward, her eyes shining. She whispered, almost to herself, "That's how you do it." The flight moved on. Dinner service began. The cabin filled with the smell of reheated pasta and coffee. It was just another flight again, but something had shifted. Nadia felt it in the way people sat taller, the way the staff walked the aisles a little more carefully. She had not made a scene, but she had changed the scene. She glanced at her notebook, smiled at her words, and settled in for the rest of the journey. The sky outside faded to indigo, the ground invisible, but Nadia Cole remained visible, unshaken, and undeniably present. After the call, Dr. Nadia Cole returned to her seat in 4D. The atmosphere felt altered, as if the cabin itself had shifted on its axis. She eased into her seat, notebook balanced on her lap, hands resting on top, her breath moving more slowly than before. The sun, dropping lower in the sky, flooded the cabin with gold and shadow. Her reflection in the window was soft, a silhouette against a tapestry of clouds. She listened as Rachel and Todd moved up and down the aisle. Their voices lower, gestures more careful. There was a new gentleness to their presence, a hint of apology in every offer of coffee or glass of water. Even Thomas Hallbridge, who had once radiated irritation, sat back in his seat, eyes fixed out the window. He looked as if he were trying to shrink inside his own skin. Nadia opened her notebook and wrote, "Respect shouldn't be conditional." She underlined it. Once, twice. She paused, letting the words sit, feeling their weight. She thought about all the ways respect was rationed out, measured and tested, handed over as reward or withheld as punishment. She'd spent her life learning how to claim it without asking, how to stand in rooms that weren't built for her and simply refuse to disappear. A voice from the seat behind startled her thoughts. "Excuse me," said a woman, her tone tentative. "I just wanted to say I saw what happened. You shouldn't have had to go through that." Nadia turned, meeting the woman's eyes, seeing both sympathy and embarrassment. She nodded, offering a smile meant to say, "I know. I've been here before." "Thank you," Nadia replied softly. "I hope, next time, you don't have to witness it again." The woman hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but instead just nodded, lips pressed together. Nadia returned her gaze to her notebook. Let the silence stretch. The hum of the engines was oddly comforting now, a constant thread in a world where everything else seemed to shift without warning. Up near the galley. Rachel paused for a moment, her hand gripping the back of a jump seat. She watched Nadia from a distance, her jaw tense with regret. Todd joined her, eyes tired. "You all right?" he asked. Rachel shook her head, staring at her shoes. I thought I was doing my job. I never thought it would end up like this." Todd sighed, rubbing his temples. "The system isn't set up to protect people like her. We follow protocol, but sometimes protocol is just another word for permission to look away." Rachel's eyes filled. "I never want to be that person again." Back in business class, passengers grew quieter, their attention flickering between Nadia and their screens. News seemed to travel faster than air at 35,000 feet. Someone whispered her name, a guess, then a certainty. "That's Dr. Cole," a young woman murmured to her seatmate, showing her a quick search on her phone. "She's the founder of Beacon Therapeutics. She spoke at the summit last year." A ripple passed through the rows. Heads turned, then turned away just as quickly. There was a strange, reverent hush, like the moment in church after the final hymn. Nadia felt the shift, but she didn't bask in it. She'd never wanted to be famous for surviving. She wanted the work to speak, not the incident. But she knew this story would travel, and somewhere, someone younger, someone watching, would learn the value of stillness, not silence, but stillness, that unyielding center that refuses to be moved except on its own terms. She closed her notebook, placed it gently in her tote, and let her shoulders drop out the window. The clouds moved by in slow motion, a drifting ocean below. She let her mind float, thinking of her late mother, of whispered prayers and hands that knew how to build and mend and carry the weight of other people's mistakes without ever dropping her own dignity. A memory bubbled up. Nadia, at 12, sitting at the kitchen table with her mother. She'd come home crying after being told to move to the back row in school. No reason given. Her mother had placed a hand over Nadia's trembling one and said, "They might not see you, but don't ever see yourself smaller just to fit their view. Let them adjust." Nadia smiled at the memory, feeling that quiet warmth even now. She whispered, just for herself, "Let them adjust." Rachel appeared at her side, holding a fresh cup of tea. "Would you like anything else, Doctor?" Nadia looked up, catching the tremor in Rachel's voice. She shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm all right." Rachel lingered a moment longer. "If there's anything I can do to make this better." Nadia's voice was kind, but certain. "You can listen, and you can remember." Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. "I will." Dinner service began. The trays came out, rows of neatly packaged meals. Nadia took her meal, barely hungry but eating out of habit. She watched the cabin, noticing every small change, the way the junior attendants moved more cautiously, the way even the passengers from coach craned their necks as they walked up the aisle to the lavatory. The flight was no longer ordinary. A kind of hush had descended, not from fear, but from realization. People were adjusting, recalibrating their ideas of who belonged where, what power looked like, what quiet defiance could do. Nadia sipped her tea. She felt the strength in her stillness, the quiet in her power. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not anymore. From her bag, she pulled out a small photograph of her daughter at her graduation, beaming, surrounded by friends, full of promise. Nadia traced the edge of the photo with her thumb, her heart tight with pride and hope. She thought of all the rooms her daughter would walk into. She prayed the next generation would be met with open doors instead of barriers disguised as procedures. As the plane began its slow descent toward Portland, a gentle announcement chimed through the speakers. The captain thanked everyone for their patience and professionalism. His voice, usually clipped and businesslike, had softened, as if he too had sensed the gravity of what had happened in the cabin. Nadia closed her eyes, let the moment settle over her. The cabin was still, every movement softer, every word spoken with more care. She did not seek applause, did not expect gratitude. She carried the lesson with her, the lesson her mother taught, that she now hoped to pass on in a quieter, more powerful way. Let them adjust. Let the world learn how to sit with someone who will not be moved. She smiled to herself as the plane touched down, the wheels finding ground. The journey not quite over, but forever changed. As the wheels of Flight 316 rolled onto the tarmac in Portland, a different kind of landing was happening elsewhere. In the headquarters of Vantage Sky, tucked inside a glass tower downtown, a notification lit up across several screens at once. Incident on Flight 319. The subject line read, VIP Dr. Nadia Cole, CEO intervention required. Monica Hayes, Director of Ground Operations for Vantage Sky's Portland hub, was the first to see it. She read the words twice, the lines of her face tightening as she realized what they meant. Monica had worked 20 years in airline operations. She had handled weather delays, security scares, emergency landings, celebrity tantrums, but this was different. This wasn't about turbulence or a technical fault. This was about someone who could change the air around her with just her presence. Monica pressed the intercom and spoke with the composure of a woman who'd seen almost everything. Prepare a private escort at Gate 18. No press, no crowd. I want that arrival as quiet as a secret. Down the hall, in a windowless room where the legal team worked late. Kareem, a junior associate, clicked open the same email. He read the incident report 3 times, his jaw set. He knew who Dr. Nadia Cole was. Her name came up in diversity meetings, in biotech investment roundups, in LinkedIn threads about leadership. But to see her name in an incident log, this, he knew, was not an ordinary protocol breach. He sent a message to the VP of Legal, flagging it urgent. In another corner of the building, the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion stared at her phone, reading updates as they trickled in from the flight. She closed her eyes, exhaled. She had pushed for bias protocol reviews for years, but always as an abstract, never as a real, present failure unfolding in the sky above Oregon. At a round table near the top floor, a PR manager silenced her notifications and pulled up a crisis communications template. She started typing a draft statement, but paused. Dr. Cole's words from her call with Eric Sandler echoed in her mind. What I require is not comfort, it's change. She deleted the draft, across town, in a quiet, high-ceilinged office. Eric Sandler stared at his phone. He watched the flight's progress on a live tracker. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. He was used to angry passengers, to delays, to complaints. He was not used to feeling powerless. He thought about Dr. Cole's voice, calm and precise on the call, making no demands, but leaving no room for comfort. She hadn't asked for an upgrade, or an apology, or a favor. She had asked for accountability, for structure, for a change that went beyond her own experience. Eric got up from his desk and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on the city lights below. In all his years in the airline business, he had prided himself on staying ahead of problems, but this time he was behind. At the airport, Monica Hayes assembled her team at Gate 18. This is not about making someone comfortable, she told them. It's about showing we can learn. About treating a woman who should never have been questioned like she belongs here, because she does. Her team nodded. They straightened their jackets, double-checked the signage, kept their voices low. The ground staff near the gate whispered to one another, some with recognition, some just sensing the gravity of the moment. Inside the plane, the cabin was alive with low conversation. Passengers packed up their things, checking their phones for signal as the plane taxied toward the gate. Nadia Cole remained seated, notebook in her lap, her gaze steady. Rachel approached her, voice quiet. We'll be arriving at a private gate. Dr. Cole, Ms. Hayes from operations will meet you at the door. Nadia nodded, reading Rachel's face, seeing the mixture of relief and lingering shame. Thank you, she said, and she meant it. She could see that Rachel had traveled through her own arc on this flight, moving from procedural obedience to something closer to awareness. Todd stood at the front of business class, watching the aisles. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, he waited until everyone else had stood before, motioning for Nadia to gather her things. A few rows behind, Thomas Hallbridge collected his belongings with quick, jerky motions. He glanced once in Nadia's direction, but didn't meet her eyes. There was no more bravado, no more claims, only a desire to exit quietly, to blend back into the background. Nadia rose, moving deliberately. She placed her notebook in her tote, adjusted her sweater, and paused for a breath. She felt the eyes again, not just of passengers, but of the crew, the staff waiting at the gate, the people who would read the incident log and the ones who would see themselves reflected in it. In her mind, a question echoed. What now? She stepped into the aisle. A young woman in 6C whispered, "Thank you." So softly, Nadia wasn't sure she heard it right. Nadia smiled, a gentle acknowledgement. At the exit, Monica Hayes greeted her with the dignity of equals. "Welcome to Portland, Dr. Cole. I'm Monica Hayes, Director of Ground Operations here. If there's anything you need, we're here for you." Nadia nodded. "Thank you. Monica, I appreciate the discretion." Monica leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I read your last article on leadership and transition. It changed the way I run my team. I'm sorry for what happened today." Nadia's reply was steady. "You can be sorry, or you can be part of the change. That's what matters." Monica nodded, something shifting in her posture, a resolve, a commitment. As Nadia walked down the jet bridge, the hush behind her grew deeper. A passenger snapped a quick photo not of her face, but of her back, her silhouette against the gate's bright light. The image would travel. The story would grow. In the offices above, emails continued to fly. Protocols were reviewed. Legal flagged the case as precedent-setting. PR managers called for urgent meetings, and the head of DEI sat down at her desk, determined to never let this happen again. For Nadia, the walk out of the airport was both heavy and light. Heavy with the burden of history, light with the hope that something, somewhere, might shift just enough for someone after her. In the car, waiting outside, she took out her notebook once more and wrote, "Change is not a promise, it's a pattern." She closed her eyes, let the exhaustion of the day wash over her, and finally allowed herself a quiet moment of rest. The drive through Portland was quiet. Rain tapping the car's roof in a steady rhythm. Nadia Cole leaned her forehead against the window, watching the city blur by in streaks of neon and soft gray. The stillness after the flight felt heavier than she expected. As the car turned down a tree-lined boulevard, her mind replayed every detail Rachel's faltering voice, Todd's guarded politeness, the hush that fell after the CEO's call. Even Monica Hayes' words echoed, holding both apology and resolve. Nadia let her hand rest on her tote, thumb tracing the edge of her notebook. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket, one message after another lighting up the screen. Headlines were already spreading. Incident on Vantage Sky. Prominent CEO challenges bias at 35,000 feet. There were texts from board members, quick check-ins from her daughter, a message from her lawyer asking if she wanted to go public. She silenced the phone. Some moments needed quiet, not comment. The car stopped in front of her hotel, a small modern building with walls of glass and warm light spilling out onto the wet sidewalk. Nadia thanked the driver, stepped out, and paused in the drizzle, drawing in the night air. Her body felt both tense and weightless, as if the ground were softer here. In the lobby, a bellhop greeted her by name. His eyes flicked to her face, lingering just a moment, then away. Had he seen the news, or was he simply reading her exhaustion? Or, "Dr. Cole, your suite is ready, if you need anything," she smiled. "Grateful. Just a bit of rest tonight. Thank you." The suite was minimalist, quiet and calm. Nadia slipped off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence expand. She didn't turn on the TV, didn't check email. Instead, she opened her notebook and stared at the blank page. For a long time, her pen hovered, unsure where to begin. She felt the struggle inside her, the part that wanted to document every detail, and the part that wanted to leave it behind and move on. She started with a line. "Some lessons travel with you, even when you land." A soft knock at the door broke her focus. She opened it to find Monica Hayes, holding a slim envelope and looking a little uncertain. "I wanted to drop this off in person," Monica said. "It's a letter from our executive team, not a form email. Also, if you want to share any feedback, I'm here to listen." Nadia took the envelope, gesturing Monica to sit in the armchair across from her. There was a pause, heavy but not unfriendly. "I've been with this company 20 years, Monica began. "I thought I understood our culture. Today, I realized how much we still get wrong." Nadia listened, watching Monica's hands twist in her lap. "I want to change things," Monica said. "Not just for you, for everyone who might not have your platform." Nadia nodded, her own doubts rising. She had heard these promises before, in different offices, from different voices. Some meant it, some didn't. The difference was always in what happened after the moment faded. "You have a chance now," Nadia replied, "to make change routine, not reactionary. What happens when no one is watching, that's where the work really lives." Monica met her gaze, resolve sharpening. "You have my word, and I hope, when you fly with us again, it will be a different experience." Nadia smiled, the tension in her chest easing a little. "I'll hold you to that." After Monica left, Nadia opened the envelope. The letter inside was hand-signed, the words carefully chosen but still formal, still safe. She folded it and set it aside. She lay back, letting her eyes close. But rest did not come easily. Her mind wandered back through decades, through rooms where she was overlooked, meetings where her ideas were dismissed, flights where she was randomly asked to verify her ticket. Even now, with power and resources, the old patterns clung stubbornly. A surge of old anger threatened to rise, but Nadia steadied herself. She would not be defined by this moment, nor by the discomfort of those who struggled to see her. She thought of her mother again, the advice whispered in kitchens and car rides. "The system may not have room for you, but you are never required to make yourself small." Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her daughter. "Proud of you. Call me if you want to talk. Love you. Mom." Nadia pressed her palm to her chest, holding the warmth of those words. She typed a reply. "I'm okay. Thank you for reminding me who I am." When sleep finally found her, it was deep and unbroken. She dreamed not of airplanes or arguments, but of a quiet garden, sunlight streaming through green leaves, her daughter laughing, her mother's voice blending with the wind. The next morning dawned crisp and bright. The city washed clean by rain. Nadia woke before her alarm, the weight in her chest lighter now, replaced by something closer to hope. She sat at the desk, opened her notebook to a new page, and began to draft a letter not to Vantage Sky, not to the press, but to her own staff at Beacon Therapeutics. She wanted them to know what had happened, not just as a story of bias, but as an example of what it means to stand one's ground with dignity. She wanted them to understand that legacy was built in the smallest moments, in how one responded when challenged, in the decisions made after the storm. She wrote about patterns, about change, about never shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. She encouraged her team to speak up, to stay seated when asked to move unfairly, to lift each other when the world pressed down. She signed her name, feeling stronger with each line. Downstairs, Monica Hayes sat with her own notebook, already drafting a proposal for new training protocols, a review of escalation procedures, a plan for real, lasting change. Outside, the city pulsed with possibility. The story of Flight 316 was already making its way into meeting rooms, classrooms, and kitchen tables. Some would hear it as a cautionary tale, others as a call to action. For Nadia, it was simply another chapter, hard, yes, but necessary. She closed her notebook, dressed, and prepared to meet the day. The sky above Portland was cloudless, blue as hope, and somewhere in the city, another woman sat taller, another voice spoke up, another seat was claimed without apology. The lobby of Beacon Therapeutics always felt like an oasis to Nadia Cole. The building, a blend of glass and reclaimed wood, radiated both transparency and strength. She liked to arrive before most of her team, walking the hallways in quiet contemplation. After her flight, though, everything felt different. The world outside seemed sharper, her senses more alert to every glance and every silence. That morning, Nadia arrived early. The security guard greeted her by name, his nod deeper than usual. On the elevator, 2 junior scientists smiled, eyes full of both welcome and something else, something like awe. As the doors closed, Nadia realized the story had traveled faster than she had. People knew, maybe not the full details, but enough to look at her differently. She walked the length of the executive floor, each step measured. Her heels clicked softly, echoing in the polished hallway. Nadia held her tote close and breathed in the familiar, comforting scent of fresh coffee from the break room. For a moment, she paused by a window, watching the city stretch awake beneath a pale sky. She thought of all the women before her who had walked through doors that did not open easily, and all the women who would come after, expecting those doors to move. In her office, a stack of notes awaited messages from colleagues, allies, and even strangers. There were emails from DEI leaders at other companies, a card from a local high school student, and a handwritten letter from Monica Hayes. Nadia smiled at the last one, sensing the effort Monica had made to communicate not just regret, but determination. She settled at her desk, opened her notebook, and began to write about the previous day. Not the incident, but the aftermath. The moment when you decide how to respond once the world has seen you. Was it enough to simply return to work? Or was she now responsible for something larger? Nadia found herself wrestling with the answer. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Julia, her chief of staff, entered with a tablet and a gentle urgency. Morning, Dr. Cole. There's been a spike in media requests since last night. News outlets, advocacy groups, even a podcast from the UK. I've filtered the most respectful ones. But Julia hesitated, concern etching lines around her eyes. "You don't have to do this. Not if you're tired." Nadia considered. She felt the familiar tug of weariness, but also something deeper, a sense of responsibility. Not for herself, but for those who might see themselves in her story. "Thank you, Julia," Nadia replied. "Let's hold off on statements for now. I need to make sure the lesson doesn't get lost in the noise." Julia nodded, relief evident. "I'll tell the team." When Julia left, Nadia reflected on what mattered most. The truth was, she didn't want to be the story. She wanted the story to become a new standard, a quiet resolve, not a viral moment. Yet she knew the world needed examples, especially for those still learning what it meant to stand their ground. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter, who answered on the first ring. "Hey, Mom," her daughter said, voice bright but tinged with concern. "You okay?" Nadia smiled, feeling a little lighter. "I am. I just needed to hear your voice. You're a legend at my school right now. Everyone's talking about what happened. You changed things. You know," Nadia shook her head, even though her daughter couldn't see it. "Change takes more than a story. But maybe it's a start. It's more than a start." Her daughter insisted. "You showed people how to carry themselves, how to belong no matter what room they're in." They spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation drifting from heavy topics to shared laughter, old jokes, and weekend plans. When they hung up, Nadia's heart felt steadier. Later, as she walked through the Beacon Therapeutics labs, Nadia noticed the way people looked at her not as a spectacle, but as a reference point. A new intern, a young black woman with a bright scarf and bright eyes, approached her near the break room. "Dr. Cole, I just wanted to say thank you. I read what happened. I've always worried about standing out too much, being asked to move, being told I don't belong. Seeing you, it gives me hope." Nadia met her gaze, offering a smile full of warmth and memory. "Belonging isn't granted," she said quietly. "It's claimed. Every day. Sometimes you have to remind the world." The intern nodded, her expression growing thoughtful and determined. "I'll remember that." In the days that followed, Nadia's story rippled outward. At Vantage Sky, Monica Hayes pushed for changes to crew training, leading difficult conversations with her staff. In boardrooms, executives debated new policies, referencing the Cole Protocol in memos and meetings. In community centers and classrooms, teachers and parents shared the story as an example of quiet courage. Nadia remained steady, aware that fame could vanish as quickly as it appeared. She focused on her work, her team, and her family. But sometimes, in moments between meetings or late at night with her notebook open, she would reflect on the journey from that business class seat to her office chair. She thought of the difference between being seen and being understood. One evening, while sitting on her balcony as the city glowed with twilight, Nadia wrote in her notebook, "Legacy isn't measured in headlines or apologies. It's measured in the quiet choices that give others permission to stand tall." She set down her pen, closed her eyes, and let the air settle. For a while, she listened to the city, to her breath, to the echo of all the women who had walked ahead and all those who would follow. The story had changed her, too. She had walked like she belonged because she did, and now, more than ever, she hoped others would learn to do the same. It didn't take long for the incident on Flight 316 to reach every corner of the company, and then every corner of the country. News alerts popped up on phones in airport lounges, office cubicles, and family kitchens. In one photograph taken by a passenger as Nadia walked down the jet bridge, her figure was captured in silhouette, back straight, tote in hand. The image went viral before Nadia even stepped into her office. Within hours, the story sparked debates online and off. On social media, people posted hashtags and essays about dignity and bias. In the Vantage Sky boardroom, the air was thick with urgency as senior leaders pored over statements, incident logs, and public reactions. They watched video clips recorded by passengers, read posts from employees, and saw the story spinning beyond their control. Eric Sandler, CEO of Vantage Sky, sat with his team around a long, polished table. He looked more tired than usual. His voice was low but determined. "We cannot hide from this. We need to do more than apologize. This is about trust, and that's on the line now." A vice president from legal spoke next, reading out Nadia's email, which had already been quoted in national news. "If justice is delayed, dignity cannot be. Dr. Cole has called for a full review of our equity protocols and a meeting with her team. She's not threatening a lawsuit, she's asking for transformation." The head of public relations was already drafting new language, deleting old phrases. "No more isolated incident language," she said firmly. "This is a symptom, not a glitch. If we treat it like a PR problem, we lose the story and we lose the future." Eric nodded, thinking of his call with Nadia. He replayed her words in his head. "What I require is not comfort. It's change." He turned to Monica Hayes, who joined the meeting remotely from Portland. "Monica, you met with Dr. Cole face-to-face. What do you recommend?" Monica didn't hesitate. "Dr. Cole's right. We need a new standard, not just for VIPs, but for every passenger. That means new crew training, real reporting tools, accountability at every level, and, frankly, public transparency about our failures and our progress." There was a murmur around the table. Not everyone was ready for such candor. "Let's bring in Dr. Cole and her team," Monica continued. "Let her lead the review. If we don't, someone else will, and we'll just be catching up." Eric agreed. "Start setting it up. Make it happen. Outside corporate walls, the effects were just as real. Employees at Vantage Sky were suddenly looking at their company with new eyes. Some felt defensive. Others felt inspired, grateful for the possibility of change. A few junior staff started their own internal forum, sharing experiences, stories, ideas about what a better system could look like. Meanwhile, Nadia's story echoed in unexpected places. A group of students at a Portland high school hosted a lunchtime discussion about claiming your seat. At a conference in Chicago, a speaker referenced Nadia's stillness as an example of strategic dignity, how holding ground could create more change than outrage ever could. Back at Beacon Therapeutics, Julia, the chief of staff, stopped by Nadia's office with an update. "Dr. Cole, Monica from Vantage Sky just called. She's inviting us to join their review panel. They're open to whatever recommendations you have, including bringing in our diversity consultants." Nadia listened, weighing her next steps. She felt the tug of caution. What if this was just another temporary fix, but she also sensed genuine momentum, a chance for real impact beyond her own story. "Let's accept," Nadia said, her voice steady, "but only if the process is public. No private solutions for public problems. And I want frontline staff involved, flight attendants, ground crew, not just executives." Julia nodded. already drafting the terms for their participation. That night, Nadia sat by her living room window, notebook in her lap. The city glowed beyond the glass, headlights threading through darkened streets. Her phone buzzed with new notifications, but she ignored them, needing stillness before the next wave of meetings and interviews. She found herself wrestling with something deeper, a familiar ache she rarely let herself feel. Had she done enough? Was it possible, even for someone in her position, to shift a system built to resist change, or would it swallow her story, polish it into a parable, then return to business as usual? She remembered the intern's words, "Seeing you, it gives me hope." Nadia understood that hope was both a gift and a responsibility. It demanded not just strength, but humility, and a willingness to keep showing up, even when tired. She wrote, "The hardest work is done after the applause." And the applause, she knew, was already fading. The world was hungry for resolution, for closure, but justice was never a quick performance. The next day, Nadia sat on a panel with Monica, Eric, and a group of flight attendants, gate agents, and DEI experts. Cameras recorded, journalists scribbled notes. For the first time, Nadia saw her experience reflected in the faces of others, a young Latina crew member who described her own bias incidents, a middle-aged gate agent who'd once been suspended for standing up to a supervisor. Nadia listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her words landed with careful precision. "We are all accountable," she said. "A new protocol is just the beginning. The real work is holding each other to it every day, for every seat, for every passenger, no matter who is watching." Eric Sandler agreed. "We'll share updates quarterly. Dr. Cole and her team will audit our progress. If we fail, it will be public. If we succeed, it will be because we all chose to change." There was no victory lap, no flash of triumph, just a room full of people, each carrying a little more responsibility than before. Afterward, Monica thanked Nadia. "You didn't just stand your ground. You made it safe for others to do the same." Nadia smiled, grateful but weary. "We all have to keep showing up." "Monica, that's how the rules change." Back in her office, Nadia sent a short note to her staff. "Thank you for believing in a world where nobody has to ask permission to belong. Let's build it together." She pressed send, then finally allowed herself a long breath. The work would go on, and so would she. The Vantage Sky boardroom was colder than Nadia remembered from her early consulting days. The space was all glass, chrome, and minimalist art, a place where people pretended discomfort didn't exist. But as Nadia entered, every conversation stopped. Executives glanced up from sleek laptops, shifting in their chairs, making space for her without quite knowing how. She wore a navy suit, the same one from her flight, her only concession to tradition. Her notebook was in her hand, just as it had been on the plane. Monica Hayes greeted her with a steady nod, her resolve more visible than ever. Eric Sandler stood at the head of the table, face set, voice taut. "Dr. Cole, thank you for joining us. We're grateful you're here. We want to be honest about the work ahead and the mistakes behind us." Nadia sat beside Monica, taking her time. She wanted her presence to feel intentional, not rushed. She opened her notebook, uncapped her pen, and looked around the room. The executives were all there: legal, PR, operations, finance, HR, DEI, every one of them holding their breath. Eric continued. "We're prepared to review every protocol. We want to hear your framework for making equity and accountability central, not just for the press, but for our people." Nadia met his gaze. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here for structure." She began outlining a 3-tier protocol, mandatory anti-bias training, real-time reporting tools for bias incidents, and a response team empowered to act independently of management. Each item was specific, drawn from her years building ethical frameworks in the biotech industry. The head of legal listened carefully, nodding along. "This is doable, but it will require board approval and transparency." The head of HR asked quietly, "What if we encounter pushback from crew or unions?" Nadia replied. "If the policy is clear and consequences are real, most people adjust. Those who refuse were already a liability." There was a silence, not the hostile kind, but the kind that follows truth. A young woman from operations leaned forward, her voice almost trembling. "Will you help us build it, Dr. Cole? Not just consult, but help us make it real." Nadia's response was measured. "I'm willing to work with you if the commitment is genuine. I want to see frontline staff in these conversations, not just executives. Real change happens at the point of contact." Eric agreed. "We'll establish an employee advisory council. They'll meet monthly with you and Monica. No filters, no edits." Nadia nodded. She watched as the room began to shift. Resistance fell away, replaced by something like relief. Change is hard until the alternative becomes riskier. Suddenly, one of the communications directors checked her phone, then looked up. CNN just picked up the story. "We're trending, but people are saying something different this time. They're saying, maybe this is the start of something." Monica looked to Nadia, a question in her eyes. "Do you want to speak to the press?" Nadia shook her head. "Let's act first. Let the actions speak. The world has heard enough promises." Eric leaned forward, his tone softer. "What do you want us to say?" When people asked, Nadia closed her notebook, laying her pen gently across the page. "Don't say anything. Just start behaving like I was never the exception." A ripple moved through the boardroom. Some executives looked embarrassed, others emboldened. For once, the room felt honest. After the meeting, as the board filed out, Monica stayed behind. She sank into the chair beside Nadia, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "That was more than a policy meeting," Monica said quietly. "That was a reckoning." Nadia smiled, a tired but genuine expression. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the most weight. Sometimes all you need is someone to hold the door open long enough for the room to notice who walks through. Monica looked down at her notes. The Cole Protocol. It's going to be company law by tomorrow. Nadia gazed out at the city, the sun breaking through gray clouds, illuminating glass towers in gold. It's just the beginning. We have to keep building so that the next woman in my seat won't need a CEO's intervention to be treated with respect." They sat for a moment, side by side. Two women, both changed by what had happened, both aware that change was never the work of one, but of many. Nadia gathered her things, ready to leave. Monica walked her to the elevator. In the lobby, staff paused, recognizing Nadia. Some nodded in respect. A few whispered her name. Nadia smiled at each, her composure never wavering. She could feel the ripples small, invisible, but real traveling outward. Change, once begun, could not be undone. That evening, back in her office at Beacon Therapeutics, Nadia opened her notebook one last time that day. She wrote, "Don't wait for permission to build the world you want to see." She looked at the words. Let them settle. Then close the book. Change would require vigilance, not just vision. But Nadia was ready, so was Monica, and so, perhaps, was the world. Months passed, but the ripples from Flight 316 only grew wider. Advantage Sky. The Cole Protocol became more than just a line in a manual. It was referenced in training sessions, discussed in hiring interviews, and displayed on posters in break rooms. Crew members now spoke openly about accountability and dignity. Monica Hayes often found herself listening more than speaking in staff meetings, as attendants and agents shared ideas for making the experience better for everyone, not just for VIPs. Other airlines took notice. At a national aviation summit, Monica presented the results of their reforms alongside Nadia. She watched as industry leaders really listened to stories from flight attendants, gate agents, and even passengers who had quietly endured for years. It was no longer about one incident or one airline. The conversation had shifted to something much bigger, how to redesign an industry so that respect was not conditional, and accountability was not optional. Beacon Therapeutics on 2 felt the echo of Nadia's journey. New applicants referenced her in interviews, inspired not just by her scientific vision, but by her unshakable presence. A mural appeared in the staff lounge, an abstract sweep of blue, gold, and indigo, symbolizing both sky and hope. Underneath, a small plaque read, "Belonging is not a privilege, it's a promise." One afternoon, Nadia stood quietly in front of that mural, notebook in hand. She read the inscription and felt a mix of pride and humility. She knew that legacies were never single acts, but the slow daily work of showing up, insisting on fairness, and refusing to shrink for anyone's comfort. She looked up as her daughter entered the room, bringing the familiar rush of warmth and gratitude. They shared a long hug, unhurried and strong. "Mom, did you ever think one flight could change so much?" her daughter asked, eyes wide with the openness of youth. Nadia smiled softly. "Sometimes the world is waiting for a new example. All I did was hold my ground long enough for the room to adjust." Her daughter grinned. "I want to be that kind of brave." "You already are," Nadia whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. Later that week, at a university on the other side of the country, a student raised her hand in a business ethics seminar. She referenced the Cole Protocol, asking why it took a public incident for companies to do what should be standard. Her professor paused, letting the question hang in the air. The class sat up straighter. That's what legacy looked like. Nadia realized not just in the places she could touch, but in the voices she'd never hear, in questions she'd never answer directly. Back at Vantage Sky, a young flight attendant read a story about Nadia in an industry magazine, then tucked the article into her backpack before her first shift. The words stayed with her all day. She greeted every passenger with genuine welcome, refusing to judge who belonged by the cut of a suit or the color of a passport. One evening, at a shareholder meeting, a nervous young activist asked the board, "How will you make sure this doesn't fade into another corporate story?" Monica answered honestly, "By letting people like Dr. Cole lead the conversation, and by never pretending the work is finished." In her own life, Nadia found herself invited to more panels, more summits, more interviews. She accepted some, declined many, careful not to let her life become defined by a single conflict. She returned to her research, her mentorship, and her family. Find a new joy in the ordinary rhythms that had always grounded her. On the anniversary of Flight 316, Nadia received a letter from the intern who had once stopped her in the hallway. Dr. Cole, I wanted to tell you that, after that day, I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I joined the DEI Council. I helped rewrite our onboarding script. I even spoke to my old high school about what it means to belong. Thank you for teaching me that stillness can be strength. Nadia read the words, closed her eyes, and breathed out the tension she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She picked up her pen and wrote in her notebook, "They tried to make me choose dignity or silence. I chose neither. I chose the system itself." Outside her office window, the city moved in gentle rhythm, the sun slipping behind buildings, gold light lingering on glass. Nadia sat quietly, letting the room fill with peace. Legacy, she thought, isn't noise. It's echo, the kind that stays even after the applause fades, even after the headlines have moved on. It's the story that lives in the way people sit a little taller, the way a company answers a complaint, the way a girl in a crowded airport learns to say, "This seat is mine." In her final act that day, Nadia stood, gathered her things, and left her office as she always did with calm and intention. In the lobby, staff nodded to her, not with fanfare but with the simple, profound respect earned by someone who had helped the world become a little more just. As she walked to her car, she glanced up at the sky, the last light shimmering in the west. She thought of her mother, her daughter, Monica, Julia, every quiet witness on Flight 316. The work was not over, and it never would be. But now, she knew she was not carrying it alone. Dr. Nadia Cole didn't just reclaim a seat on a plane, she challenged a system built on assumptions, bias, and silence. Her quiet strength forced an airline to confront its flaws and set new standards for dignity and respect. But beyond policy changes, her story reminds us of the deeper, ongoing struggle against discrimination that many still face every day. This story is a call to recognize the courage it takes to stand firm, without shouting, to rewrite the rules quietly but powerfully. It's a reminder that justice isn't just about loud victories, it's about the small, steady acts of resilience that ripple outward, changing lives and institutions. We honor Nadia's legacy by refusing to accept just the way things are and by standing with those who are often asked to move aside. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your heart, please like this video, share it widely, and subscribe to our channel. More stories like this, stories of justice, strength, and hope are coming. Together, let's keep the conversation alive, because change begins with us, and sometimes it starts with simply refusing to be moved.